Hi, everyone. So we'll go ahead and get started. I know some people will still be signing on and joining us, but out of respect for everyone's time, I just want to make sure that we get started. My name is Min Ngo, and I am the executive director and board chair of mBOLDen Change. And for those of you who are just meeting us for the first time, Embolden Change works to meet the basic needs of families, strengthen household economic stability, and advocate for the dignity, equity, and opportunity that every community deserves. So much of our work comes down to two questions.
Cheese pizza. It's pretty coming soon.
First, whether families have what they need, not just to get by, but to thrive, and who gets to really shape the systems and policies that determine that. That's why this evening's conversation sits right at the heart of what we care about. And Atima Omara's new, powerful, and really moving book, The Instigators, makes the case that Black women have been and are essential to American democracy, not just at the ballot box, but in the everyday work of organizing, advocating, and holding communities together and building them up. It's a book about power, leadership, who is moving change forward, and how we can all be a part of that progress. A couple of quick notes before we get started. We are recording this conversation and everyone is muted. And so I'd like to ask that everyone stay muted so that our recording is clean of background noise. And as the conversation progresses, please drop your questions in the chat and we'll get to them and call on you during our dedicated Q&A. Now, last but not least, I'm excited to introduce Vanita Lee-Tatum, who is our moderator today. She is a first vice president and commercial banker at Amalgamated Bank, and her work really lives at the intersection of capital and community. She is deeply, deeply committed to economic equity and sustainable community development. She serves on the board of the Crucible in Oakland, and she's a brilliant visual artist who explores the themes of identity and community. So, Vanita, thank you for joining us and guiding us through this conversation. And I'm happy to turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Min, and thank you, mBOLDen, for inviting me to moderate this conversation. So good evening, everyone, and welcome. It is truly a pleasure to be here with all of you for what I know is going to be a thoughtful and inspiring conversation. Tonight, we are honored to welcome Atima Omara, award-winning political strategist, writer, speaker, and advocate whose work has shaped conversations around democracy, leadership, race, and gender for nearly 2 decades. Atima has advised campaigns and organizations across the country and has become a trusted voice on the future of our democracy. In her new book, which we're exploring tonight, The Instigators, How Black Women Have Been Essential to American Democracy and What We Can Learn from Them, is both a powerful historical exploration and a timely call to action. In it, Atima examines the often overlooked leadership of Black women and the lessons their organizing, vision, and persistence offer all of us as we work towards exploring a more inclusive democracy. So with that, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Atima. I invite you to utilize the emojis, utilize the chat as mentioned, and let's have some fun and get into this discussion this evening. So I wanted to just start off by noting that I had the opportunity to have a physical copy of the book, and it matches my lipstick and nails. I just noticed that, so it's my favorite at the moment. And I also had a chance to listen to the audio book through Audible because I have a monthly subscription. And so this month, The Instigators was my pick. I always pick Black women authors. and it was just very timely. And so I've been immersed in the book and also listening to your voice, which has been a very interesting experience. And so again, we're thrilled to have this time with you. I'm going to start off by asking what inspired you to write this book now? And what do you hope readers take away from the idea of being an instigator?
Well, first off, thank you for the generous introduction, Vanita. Much appreciated, and glad to be here. So when I wrote this book, one of the things that I was thinking of, and interesting in publishing, you don't write a book within like a year. You really, kind of soup to nuts, like probably it's a couple years of going through the editing process and writing and researching. On the more shorter end, there's some people who take a lot longer. Um, but when I thought about it, it was probably like 2019, 2020, and it was just right after a lot of things. And I open with the introduction of this introduction in the book, where I talk about my experience in Virginia politics and reflecting on Virginia really moving forward and becoming a state that was once the capital of the Confederacy and is now has repealed the death penalty, has legalized marijuana, is a state that is considered sort of a place where every other state in the South and even in some places in the Midwest go to get access to reproductive health care services, including abortions. We now have paid family leave. All of these things that we accomplished that were pretty progressive in a state that didn't necessarily have that history is because of a lot of the work of Black women as organizers, legislators, elected officials, cabinet appointees to the governor. And, it came out of sort of this moment between 2019 and 2021 where they, really used, the incident blackface with our governor at the time. And also, what happened in the spring of 20 between the pandemic and then George Floyd's murder. And so it really got me thinking, hey, what would our society be like if we weren't just listening to Black women when, stuff's on fire, quite frankly. Like we had them at the table all the time on strategy and organizing and fundraising and all of that. And that's what sort of led to the layout of this book.
Yeah. Well, when we had our pre-call, I jokingly told you like my experience with the word instigators, right? It's a very provocative title. I'm sure
Yeah.
for each of us it means something. Um, but it took shape in my mind for me growing up in East Oakland. I said this, and the Black women in my community, we have attitude, right? And so the term instigator was not always seen with a positive connotation. It always had a negative connotation to it. But I love the way that you reclaimed this term for us. And I'd love for you to share more about what qualities define an instigator and how Black women have embodied those qualities throughout history.
Yeah, I give this name to this demographic of women. I say 18 to 45, but even can be younger because some of the Black women are girls that I write of who are in high school and I'm a little bit younger. And they're really this, folks who are the word itself, instigator means somebody who initiates change, start something for change. That's, what it means as a noun, and that's what connects all of these Black women that I write about. And it is used also in the context as an agitator, somebody who starts something that's like an issue. They make problems at a rally or a march or cause distractions, but it's also can be used as something for good. And a person, who is an instigator is somebody who doesn't wait to be asked to do things. They look around, they see problems, they think of how they can improve them, what can be done to change how things are happening. They are mission driven. They are not, people who are centered on themselves. They are centered on the collective and the community. They are independent minded. They are entrepreneurial in nature. They don't necessarily go with the status quo if the status quo doesn't make sense to them. And that connects all of the women and the non-binary folks that I write about in the book. That whether it's in media or organizing as elected officials, as campaign staff, as government leaders, these were folks who were trying to find different ways of doing things, pushing against the grain uh, to get stuff done.
Yes, and that's what we do best. And I I love how you're urging folks to hear us first before, the fires and before the fallout,
Mhm.
because we've been here advocating all along. Um, so what leadership lessons can organizers, entrepreneurs, advocates, and community leaders learn from the women who are featured in the book? You tell some incredible stories, and I'm also curious to understand more about which stories feel especially relevant given today's challenges.
Yeah, for me, when I wrote this book, I wanted, the stories were going to be centered around Black women because I knew that this is a community that, because of their circumstances of being pushed intentionally, marginalized in the political process, that their work, in turn to advocate for them communities and themselves would lift all boats. And though I center it around their stories, I want everybody to be able to read it and take lessons that they can apply in their work, hence and what we can learn from them as part of the subtitle. And, what I want people to understand is that you don't have to necessarily run for public office to make a difference. If you're called to do that, then that's great. You can, serve in government as an appointee or on a county or community or city commission. You can be on nonprofit boards. You can be a faith leader. You can be somebody who donates if you don't have a lot of time, like I work with somebody who doesn't have a lot of time. Outside of work, they're spending time with their family, but they're doing a lot of in their everyday work with their children, like education around how to be civically engaged, to give back to their community, to take them to volunteer in charitable events, so it impresses on them as the up and coming next generation how they can help. Maybe you don't have a lot of time and you can just donate to causes. That's still important. So, you can be a business owner, or a leader in a business, such as yourself, Anita, and use the business that you're leading as an opportunity to donate to causes that make sense, whether it's donating the services of said business or donating financial resources. So I really want people to walk away from it feeling, all right, I don't have to be the Democratic Party leader. I don't have to run for public office. There are so many ways to contribute and to find that skill set and that way to be able to do that.
I absolutely love that because oftentimes when people don't hold formal power, they're not able to see the ways that they can create change and move the dial forward. But we all do it in different ways. And I love the way you demonstrated that through storytelling in the ways that Black women have done that,
Mhm.
throughout history. Now, something has been weighing on my mind, something you said in the book. You talked about Black hair politics. And I just wanted to go into this a little bit because you spoke about some of the barriers that women of color, Black women, especially LGBTQ plus women face when they are looking to run for office. And a lot of that is economic, right? And not being able to afford it. But then also when Black women are having the opportunity, how hair politics comes into play. And you specifically mentioned that Black women are often advised to pick a hairstyle and stick with it, especially during a campaign. Can you
Mhm.
talk a little bit more about it? It's been on my mind. We change our hair often. It's not
Yeah.
thick
Yeah.
too. But I thought that was very fascinating and I wanted to explore that a little bit further.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think it was kind of interesting and sort of Like, when I heard it, it was like the first time I was like, okay, I mean, I guess I could kind of see that, sort of. And I think in sort of this like harmless like mindset of somebody who's not black thinking, okay, well, if you change your hair, they're gonna think you're like a completely different person.
Right.
When it's just really a completely different style, like, right? Or just a different hairstyle, but you're like the same person. And so, they would say, okay, just pick braids or pick, flat iron or wig or whatever that is and just stay that way. And really, the studies have shown now that people are generally fine with you changing your hairstyle and they get to know you in the community. Like it actually doesn't harm you in any sense of the word. And I like to, it's, there's like a lot of policing of hair in general. Like I think about, back in the 90s with Hillary Clinton, every time she changed her hair or she had in a scrunchie, she had her hair short, she let it grow out. Like there was tons of commentary, but it takes on a heightened, very like not only sexist but racist level when it's talking about how Black women present their hair when it really has nothing to do at all with how we are capable of leading. So it's been great to see this new generation of Black women running for public office who wear their hair how they want to, whether it's in, Senegalese twists or locks or they, have the greatest weave or just a natural shaved short.
Yeah. You said government should be representative, right? And
Yeah.
so it's not a cookie cutter thing. And I thought it was interesting how it applies to hair. And yeah, I just couldn't get past that. I wanted to hear your thoughts about it. And
Yeah.
there's so many ways that people can overcome some of the barriers that either have been historically in place in terms of the impact we can create, or just operating from their everyday lives and finding creative ways to engage and getting past the distractions, right?
Yeah.
Getting past
Hmm.
the distractions. Um, Oftentimes we get super activated when it comes to election cycles, right? And I think right now we're in an environment where everyone is eager to exercise their political rights and participate. Um, but what does democracy look like in our everyday lives and communities beyond election cycles in general?
Yeah, it's not just going to the ballot box. It's also knowing who your elected officials are. It's showing up at hearings, at your school board, like if there's going to be changes that you disagree with. It is knowing who your city council or your county board members are when it comes to, anything from bike lanes to whether there's going to be a Planned Parenthood clinic in your neighborhood. Certainly, the other side knows to show up for those things. And that's sort of how, we ended up having the Moms for Liberty for a while until people like realized, oh, I got to show up at my school board meetings or like we're going to have, all the books banned out of our libraries. And so it is, being kind of aware of how, of what's happening in your community. You see something wrong, you actually kind of practice and find out and engage. It's writing letters to the editor. It's looking at your newspapers, your local newspapers, and local news is it's harder now since a lot of it has shrunk, but just sort of being engaged with what's happening just at your community. Like, the democracy is also, there's a lot of people who just kind of pay attention when there's presidential elections, and that's important. But what's happening in your local community is so important and impacts you more than even what's happening on the federal level. And I'll give a good example. Like, you look at Virginia, there's a lot of stuff that we're not going through that other states are because, we have state leadership and local leadership in place that's really put a lot of policies in effect that like, the Supreme Court got rid of a whole bunch of things. We have state laws that protect us against some of that impact. So, paying attention to what's happening on the state and local level and engaging and getting to know your legislators and your local elected officials
Mhm.
is important.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that because I know that many are feeling, disengaged. They're feeling exhausted and trying to find ways to rejuvenate themselves as they actively participate or even just turn on the news itself from
Mhm.
day to day,
Right.
right? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, you mentioned something that got my attention, and I jotted this down because I thought it was fascinating. You were speaking about kind of opting out, attending some events, specifically events that were around elections and celebrations. And I
Mhm.
noted how you made a decision in an effort to preserve yourself and your energy. And you said, or you termed it post-traumatic election night syndrome. uh,
Yes.
yeah, that was hilarious to me, but I think that you decided to forego some engagements and maybe take part in a different way. But I wanted to bring that up because I think that oftentimes we are reluctant to step back and step away in an effort to preserve ourselves when we're exhausted. And I'm just curious about advice or testimony that you can share in the ways that you practice that. How do you stay energized, inspired, and rejuvenate yourself going through these political, cycles?
Yeah, for me, I definitely I try to find things that I love. Like I guess I was somebody calls it like sometimes tapping into your inner child, the things that gave you a lot of joy when you were younger.
Yeah,
Lately I've taken up like playing video games with my husband because I used to love playing those when I was a kid and so did he. And so, we'll do that when, it's a great way for us to like reconnect as just a couple, but also do something that like takes your concentration and not on something that's stressful. It's just like a fun, way to um, engage your mind in a different way, taking walks, taking hikes. I enjoy that. Meditation. I think it's important. Everybody's different in how they kind of find ways to rejuvenate. And I think getting back to those things that give you a lot of joy and taking time to do those. Especially when you're tired, like the things that usually inspire you are not inspiring you anymore. Um, and for me, like, people feel exhausted and demoralized in this moment, one of the other things that I when I was thinking of this book and writing these stories is that for me as an organizer, when I was traveling around the country and getting in my car, being a road warrior, working on different campaigns and causes, was I really thought about those who were working in harder times than I was, folks who were working to abolish slavery and didn't live to see that day, who were working to end Jim Crow and never got to actually cast their vote as as a citizen and have that right. And when I think of those folks and what they dealt with and the danger that came with some of the work that they did, take a lot of inspiration from that in keeping going and staying motivated because the freedoms and the democracy we have now is as a result of them.
absolutely. I'm moved. I'm so inspired. I'm inspired. I'm inspired by thinking about what Black women have been doing for centuries, to move the dial forward. I was in Oakland recently, and well, I'm in the Bay Area, but I was in Oakland at an event more recently that was hosted by Black women organized for political action, and it was a very small and intimate gathering with Black women political leaders. And Mayor Barbara Lee was there, Latifah Simon, Jasmine Crockett, and we had a chance to listen in to their stories and hear from them around the urgency for us to be mobilized and to be active and to care for ourselves through the process. But I was just really moved and inspired thinking about um, what allyship really looks like. And I wanted to get your perspective on effective allyship and what does that look like in practice?
Yeah, so I like to say when I've been asked this question that I try not to use the word ally as much. Mostly because it's a person who's a supportive bystander who, advocates for marginalized groups, but they don't put their skin in the game, right? They're just sort of they're like, okay, like, you know, this should happen, this should be a thing. Whereas I like to use the word accomplice, because they're an active participant. They actively think of ways that they can use their privilege, whether that's ability, whether that's their race or their ethnicity or their religion, to directly dismantle oppressive systems. So sometimes they put themselves at personal risk. Like, think of the folks who went on the freedom rides in the South, who were white students who lived in the North, and traveled down to Mississippi and never been there before. And, we're walking around registering, Black people in the community. And you had, Black people who are always in danger doing that. But these people who are crossing the color line and going against a system of Jim Crow that had at that point been ingrained almost for 100 years were putting themselves in danger. I mean, subsequently, a couple of them were murdered. Not only Ben Chaney, who was the young Black man at the time registering voters in Mississippi, but also, Schwerner and Goodman, who were white men. And so the Schwerner and Goodman are good examples of accomplices. So how do you, in your privilege, figure out a way to actively work alongside those who are less privileged than you, whatever that privilege might be, um, you know, and actually push to change things, knowing that there could also be a personal risk to you. So that's what I think of, like, when I think of how to put that in practice.
Wow, that was powerful. Skin in the game. And in our world in banking, when we're thinking about banking relationships, we always are looking for partners, clients that are willing to put skin in the game because we are, and we want to show up and have that consistency and reciprocity there. Um, okay, so we're gonna go to the audience questions in just a moment, but I wanted to end this segment by asking if you could share information around organizations or resources that can support individuals who are ready to engage in political action.
Yeah, I one of organizations, like, especially for I say, being an accomplice, if you are somebody who is not a Black woman, but you want to find ways to support Black women's leadership and talent and ability. Higher Heights for America supports a lot of Black women candidates and their political and civic engagement and leadership development on the state level in California. I know BWAPA, um, Black women. Organizing for Political Action. Like this, yeah. I was say, what is the acronym? I always forget it. And then other organizations like Run for Something. It's great in encouraging the next generation of young people who are running. I think it's like 18 to 40, 18 to 36, 18 to 40. Young people who are running. They've had some really great wins across the country, especially at the state and local level, because they're big advocates of building the bench for the long term. Organizations like Working Families Party, getting involved in your local Democratic Party, supporting mutual aid groups. I know a lot of, I forget the name of the site, but if you Google it, there's like a mutual aid group kind of hub network that like lets you find where like different mutual aid groups are across the country. Be they Facebook groups or websites, and you can donate or support, people who need clothes or food or dollars to help pay their bills and things like that. So those are just some of the ways I think people can be engaged or um, help.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. And I know you referenced quite a few resources in chapter 9. So for those who have the book, you can reference there. Hopefully, if you don't have it, please do grab that and consider the audio version. It's really incredible, again, to hear that in your own words. Okay, so we're gonna turn it over to the audience here and invite our guests to share questions in the chat. And I see we have one from Aaron. Rather than read this, I hope it's okay if I invite Erin to ask her question directly. Would that be okay with you, Erin?
Sure, just coming off mute. Thank you so much for a great conversation today. And Atima, it's lovely to see you and hear about your work in your own voice. And you talked about books and book bans, and I was wondering how, what it was like working with the publishing industry in modern America. Did you get any pushback about your story, about any of the themes that you're working on, especially in the context of modern political climate? Thank you.
Yeah, that was something that's thanks, Aaron, for the question and good to hear from you. I was actually kind of a little worried about that because at the time I started writing the book and I got the book deal, it was like right around presidential election time. And then we go into 2025 and, the loss happened. And then, there was a rollback of DEI and things. I know some folks who had some things that they were going to be writing or doing in their jobs that were related to diversity, equity, inclusion, who lost those opportunities, who lost certain contracts. I was a little concerned about my book. But I was assured by my editor, who I was very lucky is a Black woman, because there's not that many Black people or people of color in higher ranks of publishing, that my book was, good to go and write it as I could. And so that was great. I will say though, and I encourage folks to really, especially, coming out of Juneteenth and going into the 250th, to really search for books, especially if you're interested in nonfiction books and political and advocacy and thinking of new ways to do things, is really to, buy Black authors, women authors, women of color authors. It's still a challenge to get our voices and our stories out there. One of the reasons that I was inspired to write a nonfiction book as opposed to a novel, because when I was a kid, I thought I wanted to write a novel first, was because, there are a lot of people who have a lot of things to say on politics and don't have a lot of skin in the game, have come from a perspective where they haven't had to really grapple with government not working for them ever. They come from, fairly privileged backgrounds economically and, and race-wise. And so, it's a lot of white men, right, who are talking about politics and how we should do things. And that's not a perspective that's really reflective and understands what's happening with people right now. And I wanted, to be a part of a dialogue of lifting up voices who are not otherwise heard. But if we're listening to them, we're building a democracy that's better. So I would really urge folks, because it is hard to get Black and brown folks published. We're not published at the same level as our white counterparts. We're sometimes not getting the same level of advances. Go out and buy our books, pre-order our books, especially because that signals to the publishers that they should be greenlighting more Black and brown and women authors.
Thank you for that.
Atima, this is Min. I have a follow-up question, which is a little bit different, but is along the same lines. Earlier, you mentioned something that I think about all the time, and that's how local news is shrinking. But the reality is, it's also not just local news, right? It's national
Mhm.
news. The sources
Yeah.
of where people get information seems to be
Mhm.
shrinking and creating just information voids or bubbles. And one of the things I think about all of the time, and we also think about in our work at mBOLDen Change, is how important the stories and the narratives and the themes we put out there really, really are. And so, in your experience, both on the civic front and on the political front, I'm curious, like, which stories you would like, you would hope to see more of, and if you have any guidance on, how we can all contribute to getting a different narrative and perspective out there. We don't all have, the same resources as like the newspaper of record in terms of ink. We can't beat them on ink. There are a lot of different platforms, but I think in a community, in our work, in our interactions, there's a lot of opportunity and maybe even more powerful opportunities we have to shift hearts and minds and also just raise the level of awareness.
Yeah, media is really important, and I so much to the point that I wrote a chapter, as you know, about it in the book, chapter 3, um, about the importance of press in democracy and how we can use it to educate the populace about what's happening, and how and what they can do about things if they are, concerned or upset or even happy with things that are happening. And but the problem is with the rise of AI and the kind of corporate consolidation of media, it's shrinking, to your appointment. And so, we really have to be supportive as part of, how can I help? Making sure that you find those freelance reporters who are now out of jobs because they're working at major newspapers. Like I just recently met one of the Washington Post writers who was covering the race and ethnicity section, who was laid off in that mass layoffs at the Washington Post. He's now freelancing, he's writing a book, supporting, his writing. A lot of these writers are now, setting up little bank accounts to get contributions, so that they can do and research their work, because some of the best investigative journalism comes from well-resourced newsrooms or journalists. Ida B. Wells is one that everybody knows, and she made her living after she lost her newspaper that was destroyed by white supremacists who didn't like her publishing about what was happening under Jim Crow in the South. She made her living raising money to support her investigative work on what was happening under Jim Crow, like just traveling around to do that. And so, ProPublica, Democracy Now!, your local newspapers that do have good coverage. Nonprofit newsrooms are growing, thankfully. Papers like the 19th. If you see somebody who's a great content creator and educates the public on some really great issues, making sure you share them. That's the one thing, in our ecosystem that we don't do as well. We're not investing as much in, media talent the way that the right is. So those are some ideas.
Right.
Great, thank you for that. We still have time for more questions, and I know that we have a very intimate group, so we invite you to raise your questions. Now's a good time.
Hi, everyone.